Welcome back to the Meeting Mastery podcast. I'm your host, kicking off season 2, Ryan Frampton, the CEO and co-founder of SalesQ. And we have a very special guest with us, probably heard of Alexine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. I know you're very known for operating like more full cycle AE roles throughout your career. And I think a lot of people right now are trying to drive as much pipeline as possible for themselves to really have a good Q3. So I'm curious, what we like to do on this podcast is really go over some of the more challenging moments that you've had in your career. So maybe thinking of you as like a full cycle rep previously, like what are some moments that really stick out to you in your career that haven't really come easy that people might not realize?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many examples. Like I think back to the beginning of my sales career, I had absolutely no experience walking into my first AE role. I sort of skipped the line and went right into an AE role. So I skipped the SDR role entirely, which I think for a lot of people sounds really fun and cool. But it was incredibly intimidating because not only did I have a meetings book target, but on top of that, I had a revenue target that was hanging above me from day one. And so there are so many times in which, I had a number, I was up against the clock, I'm trying to hit the number. I mean, there's just countless examples throughout my career. What I will say helped me has always been to kind of like break the number down into really digestible pieces. I think if you look at your annual target or even like a quarterly target, it can drive you just crazy because it just looks like such a big number in front of you and you're trying to figure out how to get there, but it just seems unattainable. So I find it much easier to break any target that I have, whether it be, quarterly, annually, whatever that is, and break it into like daily, weekly, monthly intervals so that it actually feels like I'm making progress towards something. Because say you have a $1 million target for the year. I mean, it's really hard to stare that down. And it's also really hard to get like a $20,000 deal and have that feel like it even move the needle at all. But if I break that down into quarters and then into months, suddenly that 20K starts to feel really tangible. And I'm like, okay, if I do, a few more of these 20K, and if I add in a few 50K and one or two 100K, suddenly that number is very digestible and it's really doable. So that's something that's always served me really well, is just taking whatever seems like the moonshot goal and just breaking it into attainable pieces.
Yeah, no, that makes it, it's something that I would focus on a lot with more like even entry level reps to help them understand like the math of sales, like how pipeline converts into revenue and like why these cold calls actually make an impact. You don't hear it happen as much as you go up market as a seller, though. It's almost like folks stop doing that for some reason, but it sounds like you've actually hung on to that a little bit and it's been useful for you. Like, why do you think even for the more enterprise sellers out there, they should be even doing that stuff?
So I would say part of this is my personal kind of selling style and the way that my brain is wired. I'm very like task and goal oriented. I know everybody in sales would say that, but I truly mean this. Like from a young age, like that is the way that I accomplish things. I love a to-do list. Every manager that I've ever reported to will say that I'm very task oriented. So for me, when I just kind of chop things up into these digestible bits, for me, it becomes like a checklist, like a task list. And so I'm like, okay, I have these 5 20K deals I need to hit. I have these 200K deals I have to hit. I have these 200K deals I have to hit. It becomes like a checklist and it becomes things for me to accomplish. And again, it doesn't feel like I'm just working towards a moonshot. It feels like something truly doable. And the other thing you talked about, which is actually something I'm like real geeky about, is I love sales math. I truly believe that you can mathematically figure out the way to get to quota. I'm in a CEO role now, but I'm very much in this founder-led sales motion. So I'm still abiding by an annual quota. I'm still abiding by a quarterly quota. Like nothing of this has changed whatsoever. But having a mathematical equation, understanding that I need to have X number of dollars in the pipeline to yield Y number of results, this has always served me really well because it makes me feel like I'm working towards something that is something that I can kind of like break. Like I can figure out, like if I know what Z equals, then I can like back into that and figure out what X and Y need to be. And so that for me is very enticing and something that like works really well with the way that my brain is set up.
Yeah, especially as you go up market, like sales is, I always say, a losing game. Like you lose 98% of the cold calls you make, you lose 70% of the deals that you are a part of. And that means that you're really good, which is a wild thing to think about. So even as you go more enterprise, and you might have only like 4 wins every year, but those 4 wins are extremely meaningful. How do you break it up so you have little micro wins that keep you motivated and stuff like that throughout? I'm curious, like when you more transitioned and started building up like women in sales, like that community, like how did you go about that? I feel like a lot of people are trying to start side hustles. Like SalesQ used to be a side hustle. Now it's a full-time hustle, right? Like curious, like how do you think about that? As I feel like a lot of people in sales have that dream of working on something as well.
I mean, you probably know this more than anyone too. There is no like clear path. What it ends up being is you iterate and you iterate and you restart and you pivot and you restart again. And that's part of the nature of the game. Like I think everyone wants to kind of find these one size fits all, like I'm going to do a side hustle and it looks like this. And then that's going to be my thing. And the reality is, even if you have a side hustle or something in mind, it always ends up looking different than what you anticipated. And there always end up being challenges that you didn't anticipate and didn't forecast for. So honestly, V1 of the company in my mind doesn't even look similar to where we're at today. Like we really started in like a clubhouse environment and it was very much like a conversation series. Yep. And that was like what I consider to be like V1 of the business. Where we're at today is a full-blown community. We've amassed an audience that's about to eclipse 13,000 people. We have educational content. We have events. People are meeting in person. There's also this just really cool thing that's happening where people are almost like making a separate events calendar for us. Like I'll look and we have like 10 people in San Francisco that are like leading an offshoot event for women in sales. And so it's just this like really beautiful, like kind of snowball effect that's happening. But the TLDR of all this is that none of it looked like what I thought it was going to look like initially. And there was a significant amount of work that went into it. But what I also talk about often is that this really isn't that different from an AE role. I think we think about like founders and AEs, they're so different, like things are so different. And I'm trying to talk about this. I'm trying to be really transparent about this journey because the reality is everything that served me in my AE roles for 10 plus years are what is serving me today. The way that I schedule out my day, the way that I time block, the way that I set my goals, the way that I have quota attainment, the way that I know that I have to have a certain amount of pipeline, like all of that has just kind of amplified in this new role. And so, yeah, it's just interesting. The only difference is the only person kind of pushing me is me and my desire to be better and my desire to take this company to the next level. So I don't have like that person above me kind of monitoring and making sure I'm on track. That person has to be me now too. Everything else is pretty similar, which I feel like is kind of people are like shocked by. I'm like, no, it's a pretty similar day. I run my Salesforce instance. I'm building my reports and my dashboards as we speak. So there isn't really that much difference between what I was doing a few years ago to today.
Yeah, I know. It is so similar to an AE role. It's like literally the exact same thing. I feel like it's just you have all the accountability and you have to build the offering, etc. But the core day-to-day is very similar to like a full cycle AE. I know one thing that I even think a lot about is how you kind of just fall into these things. It's just like if you just create and try to solve your own problems, right? Which I'm sure is how your community really got started. That's really what you should focus on rather than like starting a business. For example, I'm going to bring a special guest in here for a second. Ooh. Jordan, coding away, my co-founder at SalesQ. We in university, we started a peer-to-peer rental application because textbooks were super expensive. And we're like, we rent textbooks to each other. And that kind of got off the ground. And now this really sparked in from me having my own problems as like a sales leader, right? So I think what you said there is extremely, extremely important. What would you say, like going back to what you mentioned about like setting your own goals and targets? High achievers are typically people that set really high expectations for themselves. And one thing I struggle with sometimes is I'm like, my goal should be X. And when I don't hit it, I get really frustrated at myself. And I beat myself up. But like when you talk to other people, they're like, oh, you did that. That's great. And there's kind of these misaligned expectations. Like, how have you dealt with that being the person that sets your own targets now?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you think like, oh, it's going to be my business. So I could just make like a really fluffy target and then I'll hit it. But it's like, who are you? I don't know. At the end of the day, like, who are you trying to impress with that? Like, it's not like I'm going to like send myself. I mean, I joke. I'm like, I'm going on President's Club this year. But For me, the one thing that I did do was I did a really close analysis, like a budget analysis of like, this is what it costs for me to have the life that I want to live. And that doesn't mean like baseline. I'm like, I want all my vacations, all the conferences I want to go to. I have an office space that I use. I have my condo. Like, these are the things that I'm going to budget for. I'm going to roll up that number. I'm going to figure out what that number is. And then I want to cushion on top of that to, of course, make sure my company is good, that I always have money that I can set aside for our legal resources, for our CPA, for folks like that. And so what I did was, I think I could have been a lot more aggressive with my personal target. So I set a quota, and I was like, this quota, if I hit it, will be a good year. And then I set a stretch goal on top of that. And I was like, if I hit this stretch goal, that's a really good year. Anything on top of that is awesome. Like, that will have been like a banner year. And so I'm not trying to like set goals for myself that I know are unattainable. And I think this is like a huge mistake that companies make when they set these like moonshot goals for AEs. And to your point, they all get frustrated because nobody on the team hits it, or the one person hits it. It's not like a fun way to go into the next year. I would rather set these targets, know that they are doable. They are going to take everything in me to like get to them, and I will work my butt off to get there. But at the same time, like they are achievable. Like, it is feasible for me to hit these. I'd rather set it up that way and be able to add on incrementally year after year. The other caveat is I don't have people to report to. Like, I don't have like a board of investors. I don't have a VC firm like breathing down my neck. So there isn't someone that I have to report these numbers to. So that's also like a very freeing feeling, to be honest, to know like, hey, I can do this and make the decisions that I want to make, that I know are good for the business, that are good for our members, without having to do things that feel wrong or inauthentic to me. So I get to be a little bullish in certain areas where other founders may not get to be. And I think that was just something that was really crucial to me. The best example of this that I can think of is, our memberships today are free to members. And I cannot tell you like how many people were like, well, that's stupid. Like 13,000 times 50 or times 3,000, that's like X dollars. And for me, my hypothesis was that the companies who want to partner with us will partner with us. And if we need to find the money, we don't necessarily need to find it from our members. We can find it elsewhere. And so that was something I was very bullish about. And I think that if I was in a different situation, I wouldn't have been able to make that decision, and the company would have had to be oriented in a different way. And so it is just an interesting kind of thing to figure out what's the quota going to be? What is the pricing structure going to look like? How many, and those all require iteration. Like, they all require kind of A/B testing and figure out what works, what doesn't. And if I miss, I miss, but I'll come back next year just swinging. So I don't think I'm going to miss. I'm above pace of where I should be. So I'm feeling good, but I didn't want to set something that was just a total moonshot, because even though it might get me closer to it, I want to feel truly accomplished and satisfied at the end of this year.
Yeah. And I think what you said in there was about like how companies set targets, and really, like, I'm a big believer that most companies right now should be reducing quota and creating a winning culture. People that you have in your community or at your organization are really what make the value get created, right? And if you're not helping those folks in the time that is a little bit tougher, right, like, they're not going to be sticking around. They're going to find that company that will, or that community that will. So no, I love that. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And I think one thing we've lost is like that idea of like the team of winners. Like, we kind of got away from that. Like, I remember like year 1 to 3 in sales, there was like a really cool culture. And I don't know if it was just the company I was at, but we would do these like monthly kind of like award lunches. And like, if you hit quota, you got to go to this like revenue achievement club, and like the CEO would go, and that was really cool. And like, we would have big groups at those. And it was like, we didn't have easy targets, but we hit them. And then you went and like kind of celebrated as a group. And I think what's happened is we've sort of moved to this thing where it's like President's Club. There's like 2 out of the 30 people from the team get to go to that. Like, it's not like a great feeling when you look around and it's like, cool, the rest of my team's not here. We're not really celebrating together. Maybe the manager's there, but their team's not. Like, it's just a weird feeling. So I do think there's like this need for us to move back to like a team-based win. And it doesn't mean we have to like share a quota, but it just means if we can set more attainable goals, the likelihood that we're going to all kind of like go after those and be really hungry and really like be able to truly compete with one another in a healthy way is going to be less. So I think I really think back to those early days, and I feel like we really honed in on something good. And I feel as a whole, we've kind of moved away from that in many ways.
Yeah, no, I think back like when I was a BDR, and it's just like we're trying to get to the team spiff of like going to a basketball game together, right? Like that's why you like work those extra hours and things like that. And even what I'm not sure, like when you were selling as like more of a like a day-to-day account executive, would you also kind of work back your personal goals based on your lifestyle? Because you do that right now with your business. It sounds like something I did as like an account executive where I'd be like, this is kind of the amount of vacations I want to go on. I want to go to visit Iceland or something like that. And like, this is like what kind of type of numbers I need to produce in order to do that. Is that something that you would do as well? Or did that more happen when you really took the leap on the business?
Yeah, I mean, I went hard on what I called my annual business plan. So I would write these like really nerdy 10-page, 20-page business plans every single year for the companies that I worked for. And I would present them to leadership. And the first page, like it was legitimately a template that I used from when I was in entrepreneurship classes at Purdue. And I would use this template, and like the front page, I'd literally put like, this is my goal for the year. So I'd be like, I want to be team lead by X date. And
Yeah.
it was like a little jarring because I feel like every leader I had was like, what is this? And like, why does it say like, I'm going to be team lead by December, whatever. But within that, what I would do is, to your point, like break down, like I would actually section it out. So I would say like, here are kind of like professional membership organizations, here are conferences. And it was like both to kind of like hold myself accountable and say like, okay, these are like the things both on the personal and professional side that I want to commit to and actually like go through with and participate in. But I also want my leader to have visibility into those, because how much cooler would it be if I hit quota and maybe instead of, I don't know, like some like cash prize, what if my leader's like, hey, here's a ticket to that conference that I saw was on your business plan on like page 6. I noticed that you had this. Here's a ticket. It's going to better me as an AE. It's going to better the business because I'm going to take that knowledge back. But yeah, I absolutely did that. And I liked for there to be that transparency with the leader. And it's not to say every leader was like totally enamored or like excited about that. Like some were just like, cool, thanks. Others were like super into it. And sometimes what ended up happening too was higher level folks actually got involved. Like they were like, hey, can I see this document? And they actually used like certain parts of some of the data and like how I prepared my year and like how I set up my analytics for like board meetings, which was like wild to me. I was like 22 at the time, and like these slides were like getting put into board meetings. It was cool to do that, but I do think it was a really good exercise to just share like, here's where I'm trying to go. Here's what I want my year to look like. Here's what I'm looking for in terms of support, and just having that transparency from the get-go, because it's a lot easier to lay it out at the beginning of the year than it is like end of Q3 to be like, hey, here were all the places I needed support. But now we're like 3 quarters into it. And it's like, maybe we look at it next year. Like, I feel like a lot of that stuff falls to the wayside.
Yeah, no, I used to set like a roadmap for myself around like this year. And I used to split it up in like wealth, health, and like all these different like categories. I forget what the 4 categories are. I need to go back into my like notebook, but I would not share that with my leaders, which I think is a really missed opportunity on my part, because like if you put something into the universe a little bit, right? Like it's more likely that they'll know to, hey, incentivize you with that conference ticket and stuff like that. So I really like that. Switching gears a little bit, just being conscious of your time. What we like to do on the podcast is get top sellers out there to really provide a tip for account executives around what they should be doing either through their sales process or in their meetings that can really help them perform. With a lot of the conversations that you're having in your community today, like what's on the top of your list? Like, what do you think people should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go with this. I think really figuring out how to optimize for your day, which I know a lot of people talk about, but this is super critical, understanding how much time you truly have in a day and where you want to allocate that. So I know a lot of people talk about time blocking, really getting serious about like, these are the times at which I know are prime prospecting hours. These are the times at which I know are end of day, I'm kind of out of juice. That's administrative time. these are the times in which I need to focus on like building out proposals. So really figuring out and regimenting, like these are the times at which I need to optimize for selling time, that I need to do like revenue generating activities. And these are the times at which I need to do more of these like administrative type tasks. And then really having an understanding of how you're spending your specific day and what that aligns to in the overall goals of your role. So if you find, for example, you're doing like a lot of data cleanup or things like that, that's a conversation you have with sales ops where you're like, hey, I'm noticing I'm spending 6-7 hours a day working on this. Like this is out of control. Like we need to figure out maybe a better approach, and maybe I'm missing something. So I would say really getting tight on how many hours you have in the day, how you're spending those critical hours, and removing and reducing the things that aren't having any direct contribution to your particular sales role.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's like the first step to fixing something is measuring, right? Like you need to know how you're spending your time, what you're wasting time on. So completely agree. I used to try to set time blocks in my calendar, and I find I'd never follow them. But what I instead started doing was having like little quotas for myself based on time. So by 11 a.m., I need to achieve X. So it doesn't matter like what I did in the specific time block, as long as I achieved a specific metric by a specific time in the day. I found that really worked for me, and it kind of accomplishes the same thing. And so it's just really finding what's going to work for you, but being deliberate with your day.
One last tip I'll leave folks with. One of my friends, she's really open about her journey with ADHD and kind of how she had navigated that. So she actually gave me a tip of something that she's been using to kind of stick to time blocks to work around, how her brain works. And I actually bought one. So it's this cube, and on each side it has like 15, 20, 30, 1 hour intervals. And you like kind of like flip it to whichever side, and then it sets these blocks for you. And it basically like gamifies a little bit what each of those time intervals is going to be and how much time you have allocated. I just started using it this week, so I'm going to be interested to track the results for longer, but I think that's a super interesting concept. So if you're someone that's kind of getting stuck, or you feel like you're not sticking to those time blocks, I'm using this as a way to kind of keep myself to those particular blocks and ensure that I'm and kind of gamifying it a little bit. So it's a little bit more fun.
Love that tactical tip. That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today on the show. Stay tuned for the next episode. We have a lot of great upcoming guests as well. Now a quick word from the company powering the podcast.
Watching call recordings on 2x speed is not only exhausting, but is also a waste of time for sales reps and leaders. With SalesQ, you can take concise notes with just a click of a button during your calls, so you can stay focused on the conversation. These notes are visible in real time, ensuring that you have all the critical information you need while it matters. After the call, the notes are automatically added to your CRM, providing your sales leader with all the information they need. Sales leaders no longer need to spend hours watching calls to identify if their coaching has been implemented. They can simply add feedback to SalesQ, and their sales team will be reminded in real time to execute on it. Sales reps can also submit evidence of their implementation of the feedback with just a click of a button, giving sales leaders an accurate picture of how the team was adopting their coaching. Want to help a specific rep improve? You can view calls where feedback was missed within your favorite call recording platform. Experience a more efficient way of managing your sales team with SalesQ.